The Federalist Era began when George Washington was elected as president in 1789. The Constitution provided the new country with only a skeletal framework, which had to be elaborated upon and implemented. When Washington took office, no judiciary department existed, meaning that no laws could be enforced, nor there was any executive posts such as Attorney General or Secretary of State. Also, no taxes had been set, and the Navy has been disbanded. During Washington's 2 terms as president, Congress developed the nation's much-needed legal, bureaucratic, and military machinery. The first Congress under the Constitution convened in New York City in 1789. Congress immediately set out to establish a judicial branch, develop the executive branch, and set a legislative agenda, and meet the popular demand for the Bill of Rights. As Congress worked out the details of government bureaucracy and domestic policy, Washington focused primarily on the matters of finance, diplomacy, and the military. Congress created a court system with the Judiciary Act of 1789. The act established a federal district court in each state, affirmed that the Supreme Court exercised final jurisdiction in all legal matters, and set number of Supreme Court judges at 6. In 1796, the Supreme Court first asserted its power to determine the constitutionality of congressional statuses. The Constitution only provided the general framework of the executive branch without specifying the number and the duties of executive posts. In 1789, Congress established what became to be known as the Cabinet. 3 executive posts were established, such as the Secretary of State, of War, and of Treasury, as well as the Office of Attorney General. Washington appointed Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of Treasury, Henry Knox as Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. The Bill of Rights was a concession made by the Federalists to the Anti-Federalists, who were concerned that a strong government would usurp the rights of individuals and states. James Madison led a group that drafted the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, collectively known as the Bill of Rights, which the state's legislature ratified on December 1791. The Bill of Rights sought to enumerate certain liberties that could not be invaded by the federal government. The conflict between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists shaped much of the nation's early political debate and policy. The Federalists, led by Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton, pushed for a strong central government, while the Anti-Federalists, led by Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, advocated states' right over central power. Anti-Federalists argued that the federal government should be limited to issues of national defense and interstate commerce. With all the other powers left to the states, the Anti-Federalists were mainly Southern and Hungarian, while the Federalists were concentrated in the Northeast and represented mercantile interests. The growing divide, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, relieved itself most in the debate over national finances. In 1790, Hamilton proposed that the national government assume the unpaid war debts of states. Anti-Federalists believed that the plan granted the national government undue economic power over the states. Even more controversial was Hamilton's proposal to establish a national bank. Hamilton claimed that the Bank of the United States would provide a secure depository for federal revenue, issue currency and federal loans, and regulate the activities of smaller banks and extend credit to U.S. citizens. Opposing the proposal, Anti-Federalists such as Thomas Jefferson feared that the creation of the bank would tie private individuals too close to the government institution. Anti-Federalists also argued that the Constitution did not explicitly give the federal government the power to grant such charters. One financial issue dividing Congress concerned protective tariffs. In December 1791, Hamilton proposed the passage of high protective tariffs to generate revenue for the national government and to foster industrial development. Jefferson and Madison both opposed this protectionist economic policy, fearing that industries would become too dependent upon government aid. Many congressmen also opposed the tariff for favoring industrial and merchant interests of the North over the rural and agrarian South. In the face of such opposition, the tariff bill did not pass. Hamilton also established the assumption of state debts and funding at par. It was a way to help get America out of debt. The framers of the Constitution considered political parties to be self-serving factions, detrimental to the good of the government. However, by the end of Washington's term, the division between the strict constructions and the loose constructionists had hardened into two distinct political parties. The loose constructionists formed the core of the Federalist Party, while the strict constructionists comprised the core of the Democratic Republican Party, or simply the Republicans. The birth of the Republican Party can be traced to 1793, when Jefferson resigned from Washington's cabinet in opposition to the Federalist policy decisions, especially the financial decisions of Alexander Hamilton. Republicans attempted to arouse political awareness and spread the criticism of Federalist decisions through a media campaign, which centered around America's first opposition newspaper, the National Gazette. They also founded political societies and clubs across the nation. Washington clearly allied himself with the Federalists in 1794 by accusing the Republicans of inciting the Whiskey Rebellion that same year. In July 1794, frontier farmers in the western Pennsylvania who produced whiskey from corn violently protested against Hamilton's 1791 excise tax on domestically produced whiskey. This revolt, which became known as Whiskey Rebellion, represented the first major test of national government's ability to enforce its laws within states. During the 1790s, the U.S. attempted to expand its territory westward. The government devised policies for settlement and admitted 3 new states to the Union: Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Such expansion efforts incited opposition from Spain and Britain, both which still owned more western territory and wanted to own more. Native Americans who inhabited much of this converted land also resisted U.S. expansion. Military efforts in 1790 and 1791, aimed at forcing peace with Native Americans on U.S. terms, yielded little success. The tense relations continued in stalemate until 1794, when U.S. troops routed a group of Native American warriors at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. In 1796, Washington retired from office, deciding not to run for the 3rd term. He thereby set the precedent of presidents serving no more than 2 terms in office, a precedent that became law with the ratification of the 20th Amendment. In his farewell address, Washington implored future generations to avoid embroilment in the affairs of other nations and to concentrate on the creation of efficient government at home. He warned that the development of parties would destroy the government, fearing that special interest groups and foreign nations would come to dominate two factions. And the Federalist Era ends. Jefferson was elected as president. And yeah.